The show's brought to you by Paisley's Grass-Fed Beef. Premium all-natural grass-fed beef delivered right to your door, free anywhere in the state of Utah. It's an awesome new company, and we love their jerky and their steaks, and everything they do is awesome. Visit paisleys.com. That is Paizlees.com. Paisley's Grass-Fed Beef, always the right choice. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Utah Stories Show. On today's show, we have a very exciting episode. We have on the show with us Deeda Seed, who is knows a lot about the inland port, and she's going to help answer some of the questions that we have in our current issue of Utah Stories magazine. Is it legal? That was really the whole thesis question for this issue, our November issue of Utah Stories. We're just looking at like the underlying fundamental reasons why it should exist, why it should be there according to government leaders, and why so many people, it seems, don't want it there. The environmental impact is what it really all comes down to. But before we get to that, I want to tell you about a couple of our sponsors. Curry Pizza has been serving Indian food for over 10 years. Guy Fieri recently learned about Curry Pizza and featured them on his show, Diners, Drive-Ins, and Dives. Check out the episode, but more importantly, try Curry Pizza. It's truly awesome pizza. We love it here at the office, and Binda will hook you up. Just mention you found him from the Utah Stories podcast, and that would be a help for us. The show is also brought to you by Utah State, home of the Aggies. Living on campus means more sleep, more friends, and better grades. While others are driving or walking to campus, you're getting those precious extra minutes of sleep. Instead of going home to your mom or your cat, you're hanging out with roommates, neighbors, and friends. On-campus housing is a community of academic support, peers, mentors, friends, and constant activities. For a virtual tour, room details, theme options, or to apply, visit usu.edu/housing. All right. Just one announcement I want to make. We are going full steam ahead with our Made in Utah Festival at the Gateway the first 3 weekends of December. The way I like to describe it to people is if you like the Temple Square lights and you like lights, lights look even better after you've had a couple of beers. And at our festival, you can look at this amazing array of lights that the Gateway will have on display, including these amazing geometrical animal shapes full of crazy awesome lights, and you'll be able to drink a beer or a cocktail while you do it. And kids, it's kid friendly. It's going to be really amazing. A sound stage. You can shop local while you're there. It's our second annual Winterfest, 3 weekends at the Gateway. Mark your calendars and be sure to come. It's going to be great. All right, so with us on the program again is Deeda Seed, and Deeda, thanks a lot for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for inviting me.
So tell me, how did you originally get involved in the inland port, find out about it, and really kind of dig deep into it?
Well, I've been watching this part of our city for many years. Years ago, I was a member, I was on the Salt Lake City Council. And as a council member, I was worried about what would happen to this area because it is undeveloped land and it's adjacent to really important migratory bird habitat. So, and back then in the 90s, the thought was that it was going to be developed as suburban sprawl kind of development, which I was really opposed to. So then in the mid-2000s, Mayor Becker, and now I'm no longer on the city council, but in the mid-2000s, Mayor Becker was talking about developing kind of an eco-village out there. Again, that was a little bit of a suburban sprawl model, and there was an informal coalition of community members that I was a part of that pushed back on that proposal, and it died in about 2010 with the recession. There just was not the oomph needed to build something like that. Plus, it was a really bad place to build. So we thought we were safe. The land was zoned open space and agricultural by the city at that time. And actually, a lot of the land had been owned by the LDS Church under its for-profit real estate arm, which at that time was called Suburban Property Reserve. They sold the land to Rio Tinto, and Rio Tinto told us that they were considering keeping it as open space because as they wrap up their operations in the valley, they're going to need to mitigate against, the harm that they've already created. They've polluted a lot of things in our valley. And so they were like, well, we might keep it as open space and use it, to help mitigate. And so that's where I left it. And then, fast forward to the present. And in 2017, some of us noticed that the city had just upzoned that area to M1 light manufacturing. And that was deep. That was concerning, but we really didn't have the context for what was going on. And I was working on other issues at that time. But then we got wind of the fact that the legislature wanted to take over the area and create an inland port. And so that's where I re-engaged. I had just been hired by the Center for Biological Diversity, which is a national environmental organization. And this seemed like something to work on because the harm we thought initially could be tremendous, and it looked to us, and this has proven true, that nobody had done their due diligence in terms of analyzing what creating a giant warehouse and freight transfer district would do to our air quality, for number one. Yeah.
And it just seemed to me in trying to understand what was going on that this was so like sleight of hand. Like it just all of a sudden the zoning changed and we hear about it, and it got very little media coverage. And then luckily, people, we have a lot of grassroots networks available in the city. And it seems like just such a dumb idea. I mean, just based on the environmental impact alone. And so why would the state legislature just like think sounds great?
Well, so the state interests were comprised of developers and people from the fossil fuel industry. And so in the 2018 legislative session, this effort to grab this land from Salt Lake City was really pushed by then Speaker of the House, Greg Hughes. And he, with his chief of staff, a fellow named Greg Hartley, and Greg Hartley's brother, who's a fossil fuel industry lobbyist, Jeff Hartley, really pushed for the state takeover. And the idea, and you can actually see a video of Jeff Hartley talking about this, is that it would be a fossil fuel transloading facility and warehouse district. And so in the second to last day, on the second to last day of the legislative session in 2018, at about 9:20 at night, with virtually no debate, they passed this bill that just took all the authority away from Salt Lake City. It was really draconian. They knew what they were doing, and they knew, that they were essentially giving the middle finger to Salt Lake City. But they had the power, and my perception of them is they're fairly arrogant, and they just did it. And immediately after that, I mean, we suspected that was coming, but immediately after that, we started organizing to ask Governor Herbert to veto the legislation, which he didn't do. He signed it, and as he signed it, he also had a letter saying, well, I'm signing this. There are some problems. We'll work on the problems and fix it. But,
that sounds familiar.
Yes, but essentially, he signed off on it.
And so this was never in committee. It was never brought to the floor for debate, or?
It was in committee in a different form. There was an earlier version that was debated, I want to say, early March, before this vote, not very far before the vote. But there wasn't robust public discussion at all in the committee hearing. And then on the night that it was voted on, there was virtually no debate. It was just really slammed through at the last minute.
And they just none of them, I'm sure, read the bill, but they just
Yeah.
tell everybody how
Yeah.
they should vote. And
Yeah. And you know who didn't read the bill, and this is kind of perversely hilarious, is that Speaker of the House Greg Hughes didn't read the bill because after it was passed, he appointed himself to the Port Board. But he didn't realize, because he hadn't read the legislation, that he was disqualified from serving based on the conflict of interest language that his staff had inserted in the bill. So he had
really?
to withdraw.
Oh, dang.
And he put his second in command, Representative Francis Gibson, in his place onto the Port Board.
And so I had 6 legal questions concerning this bill, and basically how it is the government can take unelected leaders and appoint them to be on a port authority and have essentially more power than the mayor. It's like this land falls under the jurisdiction of Salt Lake City. So I'm not a legal scholar, and I don't understand where the state power begins and the city power ends. But I mean, isn't this total government overreach at its worst?
Yeah, well, we think so, and clearly Mayor Biskupski thinks so because she's brought litigation on behalf of the city against the Port Authority, the governor, et cetera. And the legal theory that they're using is that the legislature, by usurping the city's authority in this way, has violated the Utah State Constitution. So that particular legal theory is working its way through the courts right now. There's actually going to be a hearing next Monday at 9 a.m. in the 3rd District Court where a judge will decide whether to grant the city's request for a preliminary injunction to stop all port planning activity until the constitutional matter is decided.
Will that be for the Utah Supreme Court to decide?
Probably is going to end up in the Utah Supreme Court. It seems likely, although I'm not an attorney, and actually I think even if you had an attorney sitting here, that it's speculation on our part, but it is a state constitutional question. Now, on the other side, people who believe that this was entirely justified, and I've heard state senators say this, claim that the state has the authority to create any kind of jurisdiction it wants, anywhere it wants, and so that's the counter argument. But what Salt Lake City is saying is, look, you're usurping our constitutionally guaranteed land use authority over this area, and also our right.
It's not unincorporated land.
Right.
It's already incorporated.
Right. And also at issue, of course, and of deep concern to the city is the fact that all of the property tax revenue from when the bill was passed 40 years into the future goes into the hands of the Port Authority Board, which, as you pointed out, is this body that's not elected by Salt Lake City residents. They're appointed people. And, I think the reasonable concern that community members have is that this will turn into another unaccountable UTA-like body. Remember, the old UTA board was fraught with corruption and questions about the lack of transparency in their dealings and sweetheart deals and all of that. And this, the Utah Inland Port Authority, looks a lot like the old UTA board.
Exactly. And the heart of this issue, I believe, is we live under a democratic republic. We supposedly live in a red state that's conservative, which wants supposedly limited government. And the power should be in the people. It shouldn't be in appointments. It shouldn't be in the ability for an appointed group of people to choose winners and losers, because every time they pick a contract for anybody to do anything, when it was UTA, whoever wins the contract is a winner, and whoever doesn't get it is a loser. And that just creates the opening of a floodgate for so much corruption and so much lack of oversight, because the power is supposed to be limited and vested by the people. And so I just don't see how any true conservative-minded person could look at this and believe that this is a great idea for the growth and development of our city. And it's really got my blood boiling because I went and visited it. I'd never been out there before. And you go out there, and it's this, on one side of the fence, it's been probably bulldozed and just mowed down. There's no, there's no grass or anything. It's just like barren wasteland. But on the other side of the fence, there's a chain link fence. It's like these giant bulrushes and these beautiful wetlands, and it's like, I don't know when that was done, when they basically just took half the area and just bulldozed it.
Recently.
Did that happen recently?
It's very recent, yeah. The construction, I think you're probably referring to an area that is slated for 2 new warehouses, and that's really recent construction. We have enormous concern about the construction that's taking place because, as you noted earlier, and we can talk more about this, there's been no analysis of the environmental harms. In particular, we're concerned about the air quality harms, but there's a whole host of harms that could accrue to humans and to the wildlife out there that have not been fully explored. There's no plan. There's no plan for remediation. I think the modus operandi of the developers is they're just going to dig the hole or build the warehouse and ask forgiveness later. And for those of us that live here, that have to breathe the air, that have loved ones that have breathing problems, as I do and my family,
me too.
that's unconscionable. That's unacceptable. We have government to protect human health. That's part of the role of our government. And they're clearly not doing this in this instance.
Yeah. And I look at that. It was really the great work by the Salt Lake Tribune. They did an in-depth study of the mosquito abatement and how the people who are working on building the prison, which is also in the Northwest area, are really finding that the mosquitoes are completely unbearable, and the amount of mosquito repellent they had to use was just over the top. And really, they would have to dramatically increase the mosquito abatement program. And they looked into that to a degree, but humans aren't meant to live right next to a big swamp, right?
Right.
And this is the biggest mosquito population west of the Mississippi, which makes it the bird migratory area that it is. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. You're exactly right. And, there's a reason this area has not been developed. And it's because it's a swamp, it's wetlands, and the water table is very high. The soil is very sandy. Look at how over budget the prison is. The reason it's over budget is because it's such a difficult place to build. You have to pour so much fill into your construction site in order to create a stable surface to build on. And so, it's a terrible place to build, and we're experiencing the consequences of that already with a prison project that's...
Is it already doubled the budget?
I'm not sure if it's quite double, but it's at least $250,000 over budget, and they've cut back on the number of beds, which makes no sense.
Just had to make it smaller.
Yeah, they're making it smaller. And so that's... And to add, sort of from a Salt Lake City resident perspective, to add insult to injury, we are subsidizing that development out there. And, we're supposed to be a free market state, but this is a gross example of corporate welfare that is only going to benefit the developers and not the rest of us. I don't know about you, but I'm not particularly interested in my kids, aspiring to warehouse jobs. So the economic piece is very weak.
So the really effective thing that I believe Governor Herbert has done and in tandem with the Silicon Slopes folks, is they've branded us as a tech hub, and they've branded us as an alternative place for tech companies to come and relocate and open up new campuses. And eBay's done that, and Adobe has done that, and we have this growing Google Fiber network, and we're becoming very tech centric. And what I see that as being is it's a dematerialization of pollution and industry, and we're moving to the next phase of human development. And I think if we just say, oh, but we want to have all these industrial manufacturing jobs, and we want to have this industrial manufacturing area to justify the inland port, do you think that that's a bit of a conflict with what the governor's trying to do in the progression of our economy?
Ports are uniformly across the world dirty. The technology does not exist at this time to create a completely green port. So what we're doing is we're investing our public resources into one of the most old-fashioned, kind of archaic and polluting developments that there is, and that makes no sense. Now they will claim that they're going to make it green. That's what the other side says, but there's no evidence that they're going to do that. And if you listen to Utah legislators talk about environmental regulations, they're not exactly fans of regulations like that.
And they think anybody opposed to this, like they did with the Legacy Highway 20 years ago, is an environmental wacko.
Right.
Because you just don't want to see development happen. You just want to see vast open space. And I just think I'm not an environmental wacko. I like development and having an economy, but I like to be able to breathe. And I like the fact that we have one of the biggest bird migratory areas in the world here. It's like an honor to be able to host all those birds. So is with your group that you're with, the Center for Biodiversity, is that part of what you guys study and look at too?
Yes. We're an organization that was actually founded to protect endangered species in particular, but we've expanded outward now so that we have a scope that includes protecting human health, basically protecting life on Earth. And yeah, it's that simple to say it, but of course in practice a lot more complicated. So we're deeply concerned about what will happen to the Great Salt Lake ecosystem and that migratory bird habitat, which supports over 10 million birds a year from over 300 species. And in a time of a climate crisis where other saline terminal lakes, which is what Great Salt Lake is, there are other lakes around the West that had in the past been important to birds, but they're drying up. And so Great Salt Lake is the last best place for many of these bird species, and almost entire populations of certain species are showing up here, which means that if we screw this up, we actually could be wiping out different populations, different species of birds, and that would be a tragedy, especially in light of recent information that we've lost 3 billion birds over the last 30 years. Last 30 years. Birds are an indicator species, and where go the birds, so go we. If the birds can't breathe, if the birds are dying, that does not bode well for the humans that live next to that habitat.
Yeah, and it's so I was looking online trying to find more arguments pro, because I want to understand the other side. I want to know the guy spearheading it is Derek Miller. He's the CEO of the Salt Lake City Chamber, and he appointed himself to be the chairman of the Inland Port. They voted for him.
Yeah.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, he didn't appoint himself. He offered up himself, and they ratified that.
And he's spearheading it. At the
yeah,
same
although
time.
he was he was a proponent of the port. He was recently replaced at the last meeting as the chair by James Rogers, who's a Salt Lake City Council member.
Oh, okay.
So Derek's term, he's no longer the chair. But for this whole time, up until a few weeks ago, he has been the chair of the Port Board.
Oh, okay, good to know. but he was on a program called the County Seat, and he was explaining why we should have an inland port here in Salt Lake. I want to play that clip for you now, if Tyler's got that ready. Let's hear what he had to say.
That was true with the 49ers and the Gold Rush. That was true with the Transcontinental Railroad, true with the interstate freeway system. How do we location that will give us all that warehousing? When we build the inner port, that transfer facility to go from rail to truck to air, and to bring in an ability to clear customs, to have a foreign trade zone that allows you to do manufacturing tax-free, so that you're only paying once on whatever you build as it leaves your facility. That creates the magnet for the job creation that we're talking about. Your question is, how many would be in Salt Lake, how many would be in Tooele County, how many would be outside? Too early to tell, but one of the first jobs of the Inland Port Authority is going to do an economic study that will show us how we can get organized in that way and what the impact will be.
So,
Okay, so you've actually read this economic study.
Yeah, if he's referring to the feasibility analysis that the state did, I've read it. He may also be referring to the port business plan, which has not been released. It's not done yet. It's not drafted yet.
Oh, okay. And what do you think about the economic benefits of it?
Well, what we've looked at what's happened at other inland ports around the country. And there's an example from Illinois that's particularly instructive and alarming simultaneously. There's a town called Elwood, Illinois, which is a small rural town that has followed sort of what Salt Lake City did in terms of giving tax breaks to warehouse developers. And so they gave these inland port developers huge tax breaks. The result is that their community is overrun by trucks and warehouses, but worse is that the jobs that they were promised have not materialized. Instead, people are hired to work in these warehouses as permatemps. Permatemping is where you never get permanent employment, but you're shuttled around from facility to facility as a temporary employee without benefits, making less than $15 an hour. I actually talked to a labor organizer who's working with warehouse workers, and it's a dismal situation. They have no rights, no protection. These are really not great jobs, yet they've been massively subsidized by the local communities.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that Mr. Miller also points out is how we already have a Boeing facility here in South Jordan, and it would be wonderful for Boeing because of what he mentioned as being the tax-free, international tariff-free zone. Do you know, is that a benefit that would make a plane way more enticing to be built here or manufactured here? I just kind of don't quite
It's
understand
hard to
that.
say. It's a talking point that's unproven.
Yeah, because if that were the case, the one in, you said Michigan, and there's one in Kansas City too, is that right?
Yeah, and so the other thing is that when you say inland port, that means different things to different people, and there isn't one sort of set description of an inland port. Basically, what we've been able to determine is that these are giant freight transfer facilities, and that in some way it's either from truck to train or truck to plane. There's some transfer happening, but other than that, I mean, that's the common denominator.
And you have customs too,
yeah,
right?
well, and customs plays in. It may or may not be a factor. There are inland ports that don't have customs clearance, and then there are some that do. One of the concerns about the whole customs overlay is that means that we would have containers coming from likely the Port of LA, the Port of Long Beach, unopened to us. And there's a real concern about invasive species, because that is how you get invasive species. When things are shipped from overseas and then just dumped into your community, you don't really know what's in there. I mean, who's checking on the front end? You know, so there are a whole set of unexplored questions about that, and also contraband. And we really haven't had the chance to look at any of that very closely. But people are raising concerns about those things.
And I think possibly due to the public backlash, he has this idea where it will be a hub and spoke model, where the hub might exist where they're proposing the inland port, and then they ship it out to other counties to do the unpacking and the other procedures. What do you think about that idea?
Well, so the hub and spoke concept has been explained in a variety of different ways, including the way you just described it. What we think right now is that, or the information that we're getting right now is that they will actually be independent little ports. They really won't be attached to Salt Lake City in any way, but these will be the fossil fuel transloading facilities that Greg Hughes and Greg Hartley and Jeff Hartley were interested in seeing happen, and they'll be subsidized. So
do we know who gave them the money, or special interests are involved that are going to benefit from this?
So it's private industries are going to benefit, and what happened was they introduced legislation this year in 2019 to create these satellite ports. And it was interesting at the hearing on the legislation, Union Pacific Railroad representative got up and said, you know, we're not supporting this legislation because we can see that you're going to be giving our competitors subsidies where we've built all of our transloading facilities with our private corporate resources. And that's a very excellent point in a free market state to say that, but it fell on deaf ears, and of course the legislature passed this legislation. So now what can happen is in places like Sevier County, which is coal country, and there actually I think is a proposal out there right now from Sevier County to do this, they can create a mini port, just draw a circle on a map around what they want the port to be, and then they're going to hand over authority to the Port Authority, and the Port Authority will be able to give tax breaks to the developers within that circle that they've drawn. So say it's a company called Savage Services. Savage Services is a big transloading company, national. They started in Utah. Say they're the ones that want to build the thing. They're going to get a subsidy to build it from the Port Authority.
So, and the potential economic benefit, I believe, would be if they could offload a lot of the work to other counties that are kind of struggling, like, you know, Sevier County, Carbon County. We have Wayne County. Other counties in Utah really do need jobs, and they'd be happy to get $15 an hour jobs. But if most of this is coming through by jumbo jet, then obviously they're going to have to fly into Salt Lake International. We're going to have a huge pollution problem from the additional jets. But do we know even what the majority of the freight would be coming in on?
No. I mean, so the other thing that I've learned in researching this over the last almost 2 years is that every speculator you've ever or never heard of is hovering around this project, and they're selling ideas. And, you know, some of these people are making money just for selling the idea, right? Like, we're going to have transloading facilities everywhere. Everybody gets rich. But they're very, the specifics are very sparse. They're not giving us the details. They're not filling in, like, really, how is this going to work? And so, you know, we don't really have a sense of what these satellite ports might be, other than the rumors that we're hearing and about, you know, coal transloading. Now, if it's a coal transloading facility in Sevier County, that's likely going to be that's truck to train. There are no airplanes involved. Okay. So I think a lot of this in rural parts of the state will be truck to train kinds of things.
It'll be fossil fuel based.
Yes,
stuff.
And our concern about that is that they're going to be transloading fossil fuels that are extracted from Utah public lands. And we have some serious questions about whether we should be doing that in a climate crisis. The fossil fuels that are extracted from Utah public lands are made available to industry at cut rate prices. It's kind of like corporate welfare. They get these leases for very little. And so they're making money at our expense and potentially at the expense of our health.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's actually the biggest factor of why I believe that what the state legislature is doing, and these legislature members are from all over Utah, and they're not in the affected area. What they're doing is such a blatant abuse of overreach, because if they had to live next to this port, or they had a house next to this port, and they knew that this is the biggest polluting entity to enter our valley in 50 years, would they still be voting in favor of it? And that's the question I think they have to ask themselves, because the people who live in the affected areas are the low-income, low-wage earners, the people who live in and around, I would say, West Valley. I guess the closest area to the closest biggest city is Tooele. I mean, does anybody really want this there?
Yeah.
Do you know? Have there been polls or?
Well, yeah. The polling is consistently showing that people hate this idea. There was a poll that Utah Policy did or released yesterday that showed that something like 63% of Salt Lake City folks who were polled hate the idea.
Yeah, we just did a
port.
little poll on our Instagram, and we just said, "Do you want to see an inland port here?" And we had the picture, and it was, I think, 12 people said no, and 2 said yes.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and the thing is, we live in a bowl. Our valley is ringed by mountains, and actually, in the places where inland ports. Other places where inland ports exist are in prairies, like Kansas.
Yeah, great.
Even the director of the facility near Kansas City, I think it's in Edgerton, Kansas, said to one of our local reporters, "Well, you have different circumstances. This might not work in a valley because of the air pollution." He was specifically referring to the pollution from all these trucks, and that is a real factor for us. And it's probably insurmountable. I mean, you really can't add thousands of diesel trucks into our valley with our already compromised air quality and expect it to get any better.
Yeah.
I mean, that's that's not real thinking. So it's going to get worse, and we can't afford to have it get worse. There's an economic cost to bad air, and that is that people don't want to live here. Those who are able leave, and businesses don't want to relocate here, and you don't become that kind of super cool high-tech hub of innovation if you're going to have 25% of your city dedicated to old-fashioned polluting warehouses.
Exactly. I think it completely undermines the governor's best vision for our valley, which is to be a tech hub.
Right.
Because tech workers, they're people who want to be in a beautiful, nice place with clean air, and they want to know that their property values aren't going to be undermined because there's another part of the government who wants all these polluting manufacturing industrial jobs.
Right.
And so I think if the governor and the state legislature take another look at this, and examine it from the overall vision of where they want to see the valley head, I don't think this is the place for it at all. So I'm looking at my questions here to see if we've addressed them all, and if anybody picks up our Utah Stories issue, you can see that we have 6 questions in here. I think we've pretty much addressed them all. The tax increment. So it's the state of Utah and the Inland Port Authority that would get all the taxes that are generated from the commerce that's going to happen at the port. Is that correct?
Well, so it's property tax that they get, so not sales tax. So the way this works is before the land was upzoned, the property tax that was generated from the north side of I-80, basically this open space that we've been talking about that's undeveloped, was around $400 and something a year. Virtually nothing.
Wow.
Once with an upzone, that instantly increased the value of the property. So now we're talking about property tax revenue. It's a little speculative, but probably in the millions. And all of that, with the exception of 10% that's set aside for affordable housing, goes into the bucket that's controlled by the Port Authority. There is an exception to this, and that is that, and this is why we're upset with Salt Lake City as well as the legislature. The Salt Lake City Redevelopment Agency, which is really the Salt Lake City Council acting as the redevelopment agency, entered into deals with two property owners out there, Rio Tinto and a group called the Northwest Quadrant LLC, which is a combination of entities. And so there's a chunk of land out there that's pretty big where all the property tax revenue will go to the RDA, Salt Lake City's RDA. But because Salt Lake City rushed this deal, and it's a terrible deal for the city and a great deal for the developers, it's all going to, again, then go back to the property owners in the form of tax rebates.
Huh.
So the city sold out.
So they have a big tax abatement, the developers do.
Yeah. They Salt Lake City gave them a sweetheart deal where they can develop up to 34 million square feet of warehouse space.
Jeez.
And they can have, I want to say it's like $70 million in tax breaks
Wow.
from Salt Lake City residents. And that you heard kind of that debate as candidates Mendenhall and Escamilla debated. They were back and forth on that, although they're both saying that they're opposed to the port. The difference is that Mayor-elect Mendenhall was part of the unanimous vote that gave a sweetheart deal to these developers. So we have a set of problems with Salt Lake City itself.
Yeah, and I know that, and I haven't verified all of my facts, but I heard that Biskupski was on board with the port when she was first elected, and she even campaigned on it, and that this was going to be a really great idea for the development of the Northwest Quadrant, which we hear talked about a lot. So when was it that they finally decided, or the state or the city council decided, no, this is not a good idea, and then the mayor decided to go ahead with a lawsuit to oppose it?
So what happened in the history of this thing was the city was trying to run ahead of the legislature and say, without no one did their due diligence. They just got all caught up in this idea, and I think the city was trying to show the legislature that the city could do an inlet port. You don't do it, we can do it. We all do it.
Yeah, we're doing an airport.
Yeah, port.
Yeah.
It's got port in it.
Yeah.
We can do that. But nobody had done their due diligence. Nobody on the city council and nobody that I can find at City Hall was really asking the hard questions about what does this mean for our air quality? Do we really want to do this? They were just rushing in response to this push from legislative leaders. And so they upzoned this land in a record 3.5 months. I don't know when that's ever happened.
Did that go through planning commission
yeah,
too?
but like this, and then you look and there was nobody testifying against it. I mean, everybody missed it, and they just pushed it through really fast. And so they pushed
Was this in 2018
2017. They pushed the upzone from August to like December, and boom, it's done. And you can go back and look at the records, the meeting minutes, and so forth. And the public did not know that this was happening. The only people that spoke were the developers. And the city council was not asking hard questions. There was only one former council member who asked about air quality, Stan Penfold, who asked about air quality, but nobody else did. And so And then you get to January of 2018, and the council signs off on these development deals that are sweetheart deals for the developers. We actually had attorneys who are experts in this kind of thing from other parts of the country read these deals, and they're like, why did your city council give everything away to the developers? And so I asked that question, and what I was told was, well, we were rushing, and this is what the administration handed us as a done deal, and we were trying, they were trying to outpace the legislature. Well, it turns out we have the worst of both worlds now, because we have our city council and city basically selling us out, and we have the legislature doing the same thing. And so there are two layers that we have to work here now. We have to get our city to to walk back this development. And to do their due diligence in terms of what the air quality harms and wildlife harms are, and how to mitigate those, and whether we really, no one really asked the hard question: do we really want this?
And the crazy thing I see about it is, like, 20 years ago when I was in documentary film school at the U, I was following this really cool documentary a girl was doing on the potential legacy highway, and they were fighting that battle for the legacy highway, and I was like, this is great. It's actually spotlighting what an amazing ecology exists in the Great Salt Lake. Mm-hmm. Whenever visitors come here, I think we as residents don't realize it. The first thing they want to see is the lake. They want to see this amazing salty lake with this weird ecology and this regions which are all red because of the brine shrimp. And it's like, she highlighted all that in this documentary 20 years ago when I was in school. Now we just kind of forgot what we have and what an asset that is, and we're giving up the legacy highway. We just decided, okay, we're going to allow the big trucks.
Yeah, and have you heard that they're connecting it to the inland port? They're saying that, we've heard legislators say, and the trucking industry say, oh, we have to have big rigs on legacy because we're going to have so many more big rigs because of the inland port.
Yeah, so that battle we fought 20 years ago, just throw all that in the garbage, what we fought for. And
we absolutely, I think in Utah, need to have a very serious conversation about protecting the resources in and around Great Salt Lake. I'm sure you're familiar with the issues about the lake drying up and the dust, which is heavy, dust that has heavy metals in it, becoming airborne and contributing to our air quality problems. So, we need to make sure that lake is healthy. It has to have an adequate supply of water. We can't keep diverting water from it. And also, we can't develop up to the very edges of it for a variety. I mean, we could, but it's stupid for a variety of reasons. Like, this is not stable soil. We live in an area that's going to, geologists tell us, be hit by a big earthquake. This whole area is going to experience liquefaction. I mean, it just goes on and on, and there are other communities around the country that have drawn growth boundaries around things, and it might behoove us to draw a line around Great Salt Lake. And, you can develop here, but not on the other side of this, and protect it. It's also an economic engine. The brine shrimp industry and some of the other industries, which are a little more polluting, I'm less in favor of, but they all make money off of the lake. And, we want to irreparably damage that resource?
Yeah. I'm really, I'm wondering why it's not getting more media coverage. I mean, it's just until kind of recently. I'm really happy the Tribune did such a thorough, in-depth study and story on it, but I'm not seeing it on the television news. I don't watch the television news very much, but
there you go.
But has it gotten the coverage that you think it deserves, even close?
What the issue of the inland port, or
the issue of the inland port, and understanding that the repercussions this would have on the biodiversity and the ecology of the lake.
I think it's every week we're increasing the number of people who know about this issue. And what's cool about what's happening is that it's a very organic response. I am very blessed to work for an environmental organization that pays me to do this work, but we have literally hundreds of volunteers out there right now working on this. Like, this issue never would have gotten to the point that it's at now with all of those people in our without all of those people in our community who are volunteers, who are researching the issue or testifying, writing LTEs and op-eds, but we need help, and we need more data and more information, and that's where, you know, normally you would rely on your Department of Environmental Quality or, you know, some state entity. But because of this weird situation that we're in, we don't really trust the state entities, to be quite honest. You know, I hope we can trust them, but this process has been really been corrupted by political influence and manipulation.
Yeah, the main sort of data black hole is, I see that we have our mosquito abatement program. Of course, they interviewed in the Tribune article the mosquito abatement specialist, and he says it's a very harmless larvicide. It kills the larva, and it has no effect on the human body. But then we had Physicians for a Healthy Environment, Brian, mentioned here, and he said you cannot make a pesticide, larvicide, anything that's a spray that has zero impact on the human body. Is there any conclusive scientific studies we can point to that what would be the repercussions if we did do the additional mosquito abatement required to that area?
So I've talked to the scientists that work in my organization, and I need to get more information from mosquito abatement about specifically what they're using. And I went back and read that same article and didn't see the type of insecticide or pesticide named. That's really important information. But, you know, Dr. Munch has researched the literature on this.
And he said the
scary.
only study he found, it causes brain dementia.
It's
like if
not
we wanted
good.
a bunch of like demented people who are impacted by it, then yeah, great idea.
Yeah. And the concern is twofold. It's what will it do to human health? And then also we're killing off the food supply for the millions and millions of migratory birds that rely on that habitat.
And it's like I've heard other podcasts, and Tim Ferriss is one of the ones I listen to, and this whole idea of CRISPR, where you can genetically modify plants and animals. He thought that maybe we could just do without mosquitoes. Like, let's just get rid of all mosquitoes. But the thing is, and we point this out in our issue, mosquitoes are the food source of swallows and bats and dragonflies. And what do the Salt Lake golden eagles that reside out there eat? They actually eat swallows. So if you get rid of the mosquitoes, you get rid of the swallows, and then you'll no doubt affect the population of the Salt Lake golden eagles, which everybody goes to watch. And
it's all interconnected. We can't separate, these things are not independent of each other. We're all connected. Humans to the entire ecosystem. And if we destroy it, we're toast, basically.
Yeah, there's no species in an ecosystem that you can just say, we'll get rid of that, and then we'll all be better off. There's always going to be unintended consequences. And if there's any lessons we've learned from when we tried to eradicate species using other species, there's just terrible examples in mainland Hawaii. And I think they brought in some kind of small mammal to get rid of a certain kind of reptile. I think it was a snake. They brought in a rat. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it was just bad example after bad example when I looked into that. And so what can average residents and citizens do to get involved, to help be a part of this and help fight against it?
Well, we have a coalition. It's called Stop the Polluting Port. And a webpage, stopthepollutingport.com. And our coalition is made up of community organizations, environmental organizations like Utah Physicians, they're a member, conservation organizations like mine and Great Salt Lake Audubon. We have monthly meetings. Our next meeting is going to be on February 25th at 6 o'clock at the Sweet Library, 455 F Street in Salt Lake, and everyone's welcome who's interested to attend that.
Cool.
We also post upcoming events on the event tab of our web page. And we have a Facebook page, which is also Stop the Polluting Port.
The group of protesters that were involved when they kind of stormed the city and county, or the Chamber of Commerce building, that group of people, they're obviously really pissed off, and they want to see something done. How would you recommend they like redirect their energy, or what is the best way for people to protest something like this?
Well, they're finding their way. They're a fairly new, sort of loosely formed group that arose just around the same time that the port became an issue. There are lots of young people, and I can say that as someone who's 57. There are a lot of people under 30 who are involved. And
I like their costumes.
Well, and they're so the event, the rally / protest that happened in July outside of the city and county building, and then went into the Chamber of Commerce building, that was hosted by a pretty broad variety of groups. You had everything from Wasatch Rising Tide, which is an organization concerned primarily with climate change, to the Brown Berets. They're concerned a little bit more with social justice and civil rights issues. And so one of the things that I think happened with that protest was it was different groups coming together, and there was an organic element to it. And then I believe, because I was there and I witnessed some of this, that the violence actually, I'm sad to say, was triggered by the police. The police were really aggressive.
Yeah, I saw, we played video of it. Maybe Tyler could play some of that video. It was like they decided to kick everybody out, and they looked like they weren't doing anything, at least in the video I saw, at all.
They were
And
singing and dancing.
Yeah, they were dancing, and then
costumes.
they just decided to push them all out, and of course they're going to get upset about it.
And there were only 2 doors. So they had people in a glass box with only 2 points of exit, and they did not issue a directive to leave. And so they started shoving, and chaos ensued. And then there's video of police officers, in my view, gratuitously punching protesters who are just standing there. So it was deeply disturbing. And I think that the groups that were involved are figuring out how they want to continue to work on this issue and coming up with their own plans. But
so Tyler's playing the video. Oh, it's not streaming.
That action, which, was, I think civil disobedience is a very courageous thing to do.
Well, it's like that's the type of thing the TV news will put on the air. They won't do the in-depth report like they used to. They just don't have the money. I forgive them, but it's like if people do picket and they do come with costumes and sing and dance, at least the TV news has something to film that they can put on the 6 o'clock news. So.
Yeah. So my philosophy about this is that we're all working toward the same goal, which is to stop the harm from this horrible proposal. And different people are choosing different paths toward that goal. We have a group of retired people, mostly retired people, who, for example, are researching and working on a report. And then on the other hand, we have a group of young people who are willing to engage in civil disobedience. We have, sort of the middle where people are testifying, writing LTEs and op-eds. But our big push right now is going to be a repeal the port effort. We're looking for the legislature to take this back, repeal it. We don't need it. This is not the right way for us to move forward as a state.
So you're looking for a ballot initiative?
Well, we'll start with legislation, and if that doesn't work, then we'll go to a ballot initiative. We public sentiment is not with this proposal.
Yeah. Well, I really I like that it's obvious that the tide has turned against it. I don't know anybody, at least in this office or the greater area. Only one person I know said he likes the idea. It's my brother, and he probably, after listening to this podcast, he'll disagree that it's a good idea, and so or agree it's a bad idea. But yeah, I really like that there's organizations out there like yours that do sort of the in-depth public work to get the word out there, because I can see that there's just sort of this dearth of information when it comes to how our city's growing and developing. And we live in this amazing state with such amazing biodiversity and different landscapes everywhere you go. That's why we host, I think 10 million people come here. Why would we ever want to screw that up or risk screwing that up for anything? And it's like, the thing that I fear is that we'll look back on this in 20 years and be like, oh yeah, there was a groundswell, a bunch of people didn't want to have it happen, but they lost, and we got this crazy inland port. I don't know why we didn't fight harder. And the politicians and the corrupt special interests all got their way, and they built what they wanted. And so I just see this story as being huge, because it totally impacts our future quality of life. And if we want to preserve what makes our state special and great, let's fight against it.
Absolutely. And the other thing is that there are other legal angles in addition to the litigation that the city has filed. There also may be litigation hooks around air quality impairment using the Clean Air Act, water quality impairment under the Clean Water Act. So we're not done with the array of legal challenges that we can bring, and we're fully ready to bring those.
That's good to know. Yeah, because what you hear the state legislature, I think it was Greg Hughes who said this, is once we pass a certain threshold, then the EPA gets involved, the feds come down on us. And we have passed that threshold a few times where the EPA has to come in and look at our industry, which the state legislature never wants to look at. They want to let private industry get a free pass, and it's just all the blame goes on to homeowners who happen to burn a log in the middle of winter and drive their car to work. And so the EPA comes in and they'll start, giving out citations and things like that. And so why and how they can justify another major polluting entity that's not going to cause us to go over that threshold, I also don't understand at all.
Yep, and they may not be able to do it, and that we're coming to that point where we're going to start to be able to talk about that as they get more specific about what it is they want to build out there.
Yeah. Well, cool. Is there anything else that you want to mention regarding the port, or how people can get involved, or something else people should know?
Well, I think just people should know that this fight is in no way over. We're gaining momentum every day, and this is worth fighting for.
What if people want to donate their money behind this cause? Can they donate to your nonprofit or other nonprofits?
Yeah, they can donate to the Center for Biodiversity and Utah Physicians for Healthy Environment. Where the coalition itself is not collecting money at this point, although we may at some point need to do that to support the experts that we're going to need to give us the key information so that we can litigate.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if we learn more about larvicides and mosquito
exactly.
abatement.
There's so many aspects to it. There's the pesticide stuff, the air quality stuff. There's noise and light pollution. There are the climate emissions that will come from this. There's traffic congestion, which we haven't even touched on, which is, has anybody been on I-80 lately? It's horrible.
Yeah.
And this is only going to make that worse. So there's just, it's like peeling an onion. There are so many different layers, and we need good information about all those things. So we love volunteers, and we're, mostly a volunteer-led, people-powered movement to stop this.
Yeah. And I have a call out in the magazine. If there are any constitutional law experts, we tried Rocky Anderson.
Yes.
He's really busy.
Yes.
But any experts who really know where city power ends and state power begins, I would love to hear from you, because I think that when the state just assumes that 16,000 acres of city land is theirs to do whatever they want with it, there's got to be some kind of precedent or stare decisis where this has happened before, that we can draw from other cases that have happened like this. And I'd really like to understand the legality issues, as we pointed out in our November issue. So, Deeda, thanks a ton for being on the show.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
All right, and I want to tell you about one more sponsor of Utah Stories and who makes this program possible. Legends Pub and Grill is locally owned and serves fresh, wholesome, delicious ingredients. They feature steaks, burgers, sandwiches, salads, pizzas, and calzones. Plus, they now offer gluten-free and vegetarian options. Legends features 30 craft and local beers, and they accommodate all ages because they have a restaurant section and a bar section. They now have 2 locations to serve you. Their original location at 677 South 200 West, right by Broovies, and Southtown at 10631 South Holiday Park Drive in Sandy. And if you would like to be a part of this program, you can do so in one of 3 ways. First of all, we've been getting a ton of YouTube subscribers. We didn't actually intend for this program to get to be primarily YouTube, but more of a podcast in a traditional way. But we thank like the 300 new YouTube subscribers we have. You can become a YouTube subscriber, and if you click on the bell icon when you subscribe, you'll be alerted anytime we come out with a new episode. If you're listening on iTunes, please give us a 5-star review or share the program with a friend. The 5-star review helps more people on the iTunes platform know about us. And if you would go to utahstories.com and subscribe to our weekly newsletter, that's a really great way to get informed about these important issues that we're touching on. If you go back and watch some more of the YouTube station programs, or go back and listen to our early episodes, that's really indicative of what we want this program to be all about. A lot of the mainstream doesn't want to look at why people are depressed, why people are isolated, what we can do to basically mitigate the problems of seasonal depression and live happier, healthier lives. That's a big part of what we want to do on the Utah Stories show, and we want to always be looking out for quality of life issues. So if that sounds good to you, we'd love to have you be a bigger part of the show. A big thank you to our production coordinator, Connie Lewis, our technical engineer, Tyler Bond. That's it for now. Until next time, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.